All right, hey everybody, welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about wines of France, which is very exciting. This is for Vidi 305, Wines of the World. France, of course, is just a major capital for cuisine and wine in general. They have a lot of pride in both of these things, so there's a lot to be discussed. And there's so much of France that is connected to wine, just like Italy, like we talked about in our last presentation. It's really difficult to cover everything in just a 60-minute presentation, but we're going to cover just some of the major areas. So we'll just go ahead and dive into it. So our outline for tonight, we're going to talk about wine culture and some fun facts, regions and climates, the varieties that are grown there. We're going to learn how to interpret some of the labels, denominations and laws, famous blends, and then also winemaking styles and methods. So, wine culture in France. Lots of wine is consumed in France. They drink an average of 14 gallons of wine per person per year, and this amounts to about 1 4-ounce glass of wine per person per day. So, a glass a day keeps the doctor away, I guess, but definitely it's rooted into their culture to consume it all the time, every day. 90% of French wine is made from 36 grape varieties. The land determines the quality of the grape, and the winemakers are merely shepherds in the process. So you'll see in a lot of French labels there's an emphasis on the vineyard itself and not so much the producer or even the winemaker. So they have a very common thing for this. There's no term for winemaker in France. There's only vigneron, which means grape grower. So that kind of reflects the importance of that, right? Another famous French term we hear in the wine industry, terroir. It's a philosophy born in France also. And this is a concept of the wine that you make has a sense of place of where it was grown and produced, right? You can taste the soil, you can taste the plants that were growing around it. So that is the concept of terroir. And we'll talk more about that in a couple slides. They also have a very common phrase, life is too short to drink bad wine. I think that is very good advice, for sure. This might be a little shocking. There is some suspicion that French wine culture came from Italy, of all places. They say France may have mastered the art of wine and its culture, but it would not have happened thanks to the Etruscans in 600 BC, and they had learned it from the Phoenicians in 800 BC. So this was a pre-Roman civilization in Italy that used to ship wine to southern France. Interestingly enough, Etruscan winemaking also involved adding a lot of herbs to wine, including basil, thyme, and rosemary, right? So from there, France started to learn to make their own wine, right? So not that it's a competition, not that one's better than the other, but very interesting to learn the origins going way, way, way back, in winemaking. It's been around for a long time. So that's a fun fact. Terroir, here's a slide on that. It's really, like I mentioned, a sense of place. It's an expression of the land the fruit came from, right? And this can be applied to many other products as well. Olive oil, tea, meats, where meat is produced, what the animal ate, where it lived, right? For grapes specifically, this involves the climate, the soil type, the topography, and then the surrounding plants of where those grapes were planted and produced. Here's kind of a general map of the major regions of winemaking in France. So we have Champagne, Alsace, Loire Valley, Burgundy, Beaujolais, the Rhone Valley, Bordeaux, Provence, and Languedoc-Roussillon. So very interesting regions scattered all around France itself, and we'll dive into some of these for sure. As far as the grape varieties of France, we have ones that have dominated the entire world that have become known as noble grapes, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, right? These are all varieties that are very, very popular and we see very easily. And those actually originated from France, which is very, very cool. Here we have a map from Wine Folly showing, which regions specialize in certain varieties. Then we also have a link to that map if you'd like to see a closer look. Then we also have an article for decoding French wine labels, Wine for Real People, which is very fun. So getting into climate in France, there are 3 very general broad climate zones in France. We have our northern areas, which is considered a temperate climate with severe winters, with cool, rainy autumns. This includes Champagne, Alsace, and Burgundy. We have our southern areas, which is a more Mediterranean climate with warm, wet winters and dry, hot summers. And this includes Chablis, Rhone Valley, and Languedoc-Roussillon for sure. Then we have the Atlantic coast here on the western side. This is an oceanic climate with cool summers and cool winters where temperatures don't fluctuate much. So here we have Bordeaux and the Loire Valley for sure. So very interesting to see all these different regions. It explains why so many different styles of wine can be made and specialized in France, right? Producing champagne in a cool, crisp region compared to, a more moderate region like Bordeaux and the Loire Valley, and then compared to maybe a more severe region, you're going to have a lot of different wines and styles that you can make. So their specialty shows. So starting in the northern regions, we'll talk about the Champagne Hills. This is one of the coolest, not just in popularity, but in literal cold temperatures, right? Wine producing regions in the world. So average temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This is changing lately with climate change, as it is becoming warmer there. But Champagne still dominates the world for sparkling wine, especially just Champagne, right? So it's an AOC. It's an appellation of Champagne. It's just Champagne. You can't make Champagne anywhere else in the world. It is specifically for just Champagne, France. The top varieties that Champagne is made with is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. These are all grape varieties that make Champagne. If it is made with Pinot Meunier, Pinot Noir, it is typically like a Blanc de Noir, and that just means a white from red grapes. If it's a Blanc de Blanc, it means white from whites, which would mean it's typically a Chardonnay-based sparkling or champagne wine, right? Interestingly enough, sparkling wine in general, the process of winemaking was not invented by any single person, but a clergyman, Dom Perignon, did help significantly to further its evolution. So he is credited to being kind of like the grandfather of champagne, right? And his favorite quote was, "Come quickly, I am tasting the stars." So very expensive, very prestigious champagne brand. That's a little bit about that. Champagne is very interesting because it's made in a very special way, but there's also a special language around the different sweetness levels in it. So it ranges all the way from bone dry to sweet, and there's a lot of steps in between, and it's always a range, right? So here's a nice graphic from Wine Folly. I like to give credit where credit's due. First, we have Brut Nature, and this is bone dry. This is the wine was disgorged. This is the base of the sparkling wine, and this is as dry as it completely could be. We added nothing, right? Then, and that is 0 to 3 grams per liter. We have bone dry, which is 0 to 6. This is an extra brut. Then we just have brut, which is considered dry, which is 0 to 12 grams per liter. Then we have extra dry, which seems counteractive, right? Because you're going from very, very dry to extra dry and then dry. So dry, extra dry is still considered, it's a more of a fruity kind of champagne. And that could be anywhere from 12 to 17 grams per liter. And if you're thinking about it in the sense of a percentage residual sugar, you'd be move the decimal place over 1. So it'd be 1.2 to 1.7% for that. For dry, you're looking at 17 to 32 grams per liter. And even though the label says dry, Wine Folly is considering it as an off-dry champagne. The perception of like dry and off dry, it really just depends on whether you perceive a little bit of sweetness on the end, right? Then we have demi-sec, which is a sweet champagne, and this is anywhere from 32 to 50 grams per liter. This is sweet for sure. And then we have a dough, which is over 50 grams per liter. So that's over 5% of the volume is sugar, right? That's a lot. That's a lot of sugar in a beverage. So I always like to refer to Doe as like hummingbird food at that point. It's very, very sweet champagne or sparkling wine. We have adopted the like sweetness level labeling in sparkling wines in the United States and across the world, but it is a sliding scale. So, someone could label, extra brut or brut, and it's still within a similar range, right? 0 to 6 or 0 to 12. So, just depends. If you would like to learn how to interpret sparkling wine labels, there are a couple different ways to look at it, right? We have a non-vintage champagne, which is very common, right? And so this would mean that grapes came from good vineyards, but they were neither Premier Cru or Grand Cru designated vineyards. Pinot Meunier is almost always included in the blend for a non-vintage champagne. There are dozens to hundreds of wines blended from different years in this base wine, but it did receive at least 15 months of surly aging. So that means that when the second fermentation happened inside of the bottle to create those bubbles, it spent 15 months on that lees in the bottle. And that's where it gets its really beautiful, bread, brioche, creamy, creme brulee characteristics of champagne. It gets it from like the decomposition of yeast in that part of champagne winemaking. If it's a vintage champagne, meaning it claims a date, right? So pardon me, non-vintage means it doesn't claim a date it was harvested, right? There's no year. Vintage champagne, it does claim a year. So say it's a 2005 Dom Perignon, whatever. That would be a vintage claimed. So this means that the grapes came from good to great vineyards, many ranked Premier Cru and Grand Cru. Pinot Meunier is sometimes included in the blend, right? Dozens of still wines used in the blend, but from that single year, right? If it claims a vintage, it's just from that year. This is required to have 3 years surly aging. So definitely it's going to be more expensive because of the overhead costs to store and take care of these wines for 3 years, which is crazy. Next, we have a prestige cuvée. And as the name indicates, this is the most prestigious one, right? Grapes come from the top vineyards, typically Grand Cru only. Pinot Meunier, mostly not included. I think it's kind of sad that Pinot Meunier is kind of seen as this like lesser quality grape of the three, but for whatever reason, that's the case. A blend of best wines from the best vineyards the producer has access to. There is no requirement for surly, interestingly enough, but common practice is 4 to 10 years on the yeast, on surly. So that is a very, very long time. It'll be very and powerfully tasting, right? Sparkling wine, and has been stored for a long time. So with that being said, let's take a look at one of the major grape varieties used in champagne. That would be Chardonnay. This is one of the most planted white varieties just in the world, taking second place to Arran. It's considered one of the 6 noble grapes, which we have a link attached to that noble grapes if you'd like to learn more about what those are. It's one of the most diverse varieties that can be made in many different styles. So if you go into certain parts of even just California, where we have more of like a coastal climate, you'll see a lot of winemakers will specialize in Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and they make like 4 to 6 different labels of just that variety, just because it can be so expressive and it can be such different wines depending on how you make it, right? You could do a stainless steel Chardonnay, a buttery Chardonnay. You could do, partial. You could do it oaked. Like, it's just very expressive, and some people really appreciate that, and some winemakers really enjoy making those wines. So, champagne, a warm climate, cool climate, it just depends. Generally speaking, Chardonnay has the base flavors of yellow apple, starfruit, pineapple, vanilla, and even potentially butter. So, as you can see, there's a lot of fun complexity in this wine. A lot of things that you could do with it. Okay, then we have Pinot Meunier, also known as just Meunier or Schwarzriesling in Germany, which is very cool. It's an early ripening grape that produces light red wines, right? So most notable in rosés, in small amounts in champagne or sparkling wine blends. The grape earned the name and synonyms Meunier and Müller in German, both meaning miller from the flower dusty white underside of the leaves, which is kind of interesting. So Pinot Meunier, similar to Pinot Noir, I guess, if you wanted to think of it in that way. Typical flavors include tart cherry, pomegranate, potting soil, mushroom, and rose. So it's that fun kind of floral component with the red fruit and also that kind of mushroom and soil funk to it as well. So definitely a fun variety. I don't know if you can get it as a single variety here in the United States, but it'd be fun to try. It'd be fun to look and see. Okay, another northern region of France, Alsace. This is one of the few regions in the world dedicated to, it's dominated by white grape varieties for still wine, right? So we just came from the Champagne Hills, which of course is mostly white wines as well, but in the Champagne style, these are still white wines, right? So Alsace is very fun region to visit. It had belonged to Germany numerous times. So there's a lot of German influence on the grapes and varieties there. So like the borders changed through all the years of like wars and politics. So Alsace on its own is kind of its fun, interesting hybrid of places to visit. It's very beautiful. The architecture, I heard it's fantastic to visit during the Christmas season. If you are a big Christmas fan, it's very well decorated. They take it very seriously. And it's just gorgeous, right? Interestingly enough, too, this region is very different from the rest of France because it labels by variety, not so much the region of where the grapes came from like France does. Top quality of wines are rarely blended and fermented with native yeasts that are present in the area in which it was grown, which is very cool. Their top varieties that they're known for are Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Muscat, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Riesling, and Sylvaner. And for their reds, they produce Pinot Noir as well, right? They're also really known for their Munster cheese and asparagus, which is very interesting as well. So, fun stuff. Beautiful region. So the variety that we'll focus on for this region will be Riesling. Riesling is definitely a German variety, and so is Gewürztraminer too. So it's very fun to see what's now considered a French winemaking region producing and specializing these, right? So Riesling, of course, came from the Rhine River in Germany. It is very terroir expressive, just like Chardonnay, which means it reflects the region it is grown in very well, right? If it's grown in a cool climate, it has apple and tree fruit notes with a higher acidity. In a warmer climate and later ripening, it contains characteristics of stone fruit and like peaches, right? Is a good example. It's also produced in parts of Australia where it develops a characteristic lime character, and in general across any region where Riesling is produced, as it ages, it develops a characteristic petrol character, which is very interesting. People always kind of seem like taken back with like, ooh, petrol, but it's just a character that the wine produces, and sometimes it can be an acquired taste, but it's actually quite nice when it's balanced with other flavors, right? So also other flavors of note would include beeswax and jasmine. Just depends on where it's grown and how it's produced. And Riesling can be made dry. It can be made super sweet. It could be made, slightly effervescent. There's so many ways it could be made and expressed, and it's really, really a fun wine. Okay, so now we'll move over to the West Coast into the Loire Valley. This is the most diverse wine region in France. It creates all kinds of wine styles. So still, sweet, dry, sparkling, lots of reds, whites, and rosés. It exists on the fringe of cold weather, also like Champagne. So it's hard to ripen the fruit in general. So chaptalization is seen there. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Top varieties and wines include Sauvignon Blanc and Chenin Blanc. These are actually native to the Loire region. You can see others in the Wine Bible if you're curious. Cremant de Loire is the sparkling that's made there. And then we have Melon de Bourgogne, Cabernet Franc, Gamay, and Pinot Noir as well. So you can kind of see, due to this map, it follows this river here and all the kind of different sub-regions that are here. So you have Pays, Nantais, Anjou, Saumur, Touraine, and then we have Central Loire as well, right? So very fun region to visit. Also a lot of like river cruises go through here as well. So very, very cool. So the variety that we'll focus from this region on is Chenin Blanc. It's a beautiful variety. It was very, very popular a while ago. I want to say like in the 80s, potentially. And then it kind of grew out of favor. It was just kind of, I think it was just like overproduced, and it was possibly like a sweet wine. But Chenin Blanc as a grape variety is actually very beautiful. It's the only variety that I know that in the spring the tips of the shoots are purple. And also if you look at the vein underneath the leaf, those are purple as well, or in the early stages of development. So very, very beautiful grape variety in general. It's known for its high acidity. It has been used to make sparkling wines, still wines, and nicely balanced dessert wines. It is widely planted across South Africa, where it is called steen, interestingly enough. They're very sensitive to developing noble rot, which is like this fungus, and it can be utilized to produce a very unique sweet wine. However, it needs to be controlled, and it's a very expensive way to make wine because you do lose some of the grapes. It does take over the fruit, and you just have to be very careful. So you can read more into that if you'd like to. It's linked to the noble rot words there. But overall, Chenin Blanc typical characters we find are quince, yellow apple, pear, chamomile, and honey. So very beautiful flavors, very unique, and just a fun wine. Next, we'll talk about Sauvignon Blanc. We speculate that the grape most likely got the name from the French word sauvage, almost like savage, right, which means wild, and blanc, meaning just white, right? Sauvignon Blanc, I would say definitely is sauvage, like on the grape growing side. It's a monster. It's just so vigorous. It just grows everywhere. It's like this big green wall that you're staring at. And so yeah, it's a little crazy. It's another famous variety. It's not just plantivated in France, but it's also in Chile, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Bulgaria, right? United States, of course, too, right? It's become very, very popular, and it's one of the most recognizable white wines, I would say, in the market, right? It's known for its high acidity, and this variety also just changes a lot depending on the region it's grown in, right? It can be green, like grassy and bell pepper, or it could be like tropical and floral, or like New Zealand, which is like really famous for their grapefruit and kind of gooseberry component. So really interesting to see how it turns around, right? In like warmer grape growing regions, you could definitely get like white peach and passion fruit, more of those tropical tones. In the cooler regions, you're going to get more of those green notes in there. So very fun wine, very delicious. Okay, so as I promised, we'll talk about chapelization. This is something that, in parts of France, like the Rhone Valley, can do to help improve the wine, right? So in very, very cool regions in France and Germany, it's the, ability to add sugar to your fermentation, right? Just so it can end up producing a wine that is balance, basically, right? So if you have grapes that have low sugar content, that means you're going to get really low alcohol levels, right? So in this case, it is allowed for producers to add sugar to the grape juice prior to fermentation in order to bring the alcohol level to a reasonable level. Unfortunately, this is not allowed in California or the rest. It is allowed in Oregon and Florida, where grapes have a hard time ripening. So not allowed in California because we have plenty of sunshine, so we are not given any leeway on that, right? It's important to the wine because extremely low alcohol content puts a wine out of balance. It can lead to thin wines that might not age well, right? So the reason that, government steps in and why we have these regulations and rules is to really protect the region, especially if you consider that wine is such a big part of the economy, like not only in California, but think about France, right? So much of their culture is embedded in wine. If the world was to suddenly stop drinking wine, it would be devastating, right? So we're seeing a little bit of that now. We're feeling it pretty rough in the United States. I'm sure other countries are too, but it's important that we guard the economies of our regions. We protect it. We protect the labor force, but also keep the standards and help them be successful. Okay, Next, we'll move into Burgundy, which is also referred to as Bourgogne. This has some of the world's most expensive sought-after wines. Quality will vary from vintage to vintage, so this is why so many people keep track of a good year for harvest, right? You'll hear a lot of that in French wine. You'll be like, 1972 or blah, this is where we see a lot of that tracking because it can vary. The northernmost region in the world, and that produces Pinot Noir, or it's known for a red wine, is Pinot Noir. It contains 150 out of 450 AOCs of France, so a lot of high-ranking wine grape-growing regions, right? It also contains Beaujolais, but this region has such a unique style that it deserves its own section for sure. So this was founded by the hard labor and dedication of Cistercian monks who planted lot after lot and researched the value of each parcel and how the land affected the fruit. This was the beginnings of the concepts of terroir in France. So top varieties in this region are Chardonnay and Pinot Noir for sure. For Burgundy quality classifications, if it's a Burgundy red or white, it can be known as Bourgogne Blanc or Bourgogne Rouge. It's simple, basic regional wine made from the same variety anywhere from Burgundy, right? Another common label for their wines is village wine. This is something made entirely from grapes within a village. It's a step up in price and quality. Then we have Premier Cru, which is like the premier blend. This is known as the first growth, and this is smallest, most well-defined place, a single vineyard, right? So this is a wine made from a single vineyard. Then we have Grand Cru, which is also known as great growth. The highest designation of Burgundian vineyard can hold this title. So wines from Grand Cru vineyards only account for 2% of Burgundy's production. So very small production, supply and demand, very expensive wines, right? So let's look into Pinot Noir. It's cultivated just about worldwide. Oregon makes a very good Pinot Noir. New Zealand makes Pinot Noir, right? France, of course, right? That's why we're here. And it originates from Burgundy, though, specifically. So it's native to that area. This is another grape variety that is known to be extremely terroir expressive, right? We talked about like how Chardonnay and all these different things that winemakers can specialize in. There is like a cult of people who follow and love and adore Pinot Noir, right? It's an interesting thing to see how it's developed, right? It's typically a lighter bodied red wine. It can have that funk to it, that mushroom, that potting soil, a lot like Pinot Meunier, right? But it also has that red fruit, that cherry raspberry, and then sometimes it can develop a hibiscus character as well, right? So overall, it's a grape region that favors, it's a grape that favors cool climate regions. You can grow it in like the Sierra foothills. We do have Pinot Noir here. You have to plant it in a very specific microclimate that it can thrive in. So you have to be a very good grape grower to understand exactly where it can be planted. Beautiful. Moving on to Bordeaux. Definitely, along with Burgundy and I guess all these regions, one of the most recognized regions in France, right? And it's also considered the most commercially successful by many people. This is the largest AOC in France. It contains very expensive wines. Some first growth wines range from about $1,500 per bottle. That was the price, I believe that was quoted by Wine Bible by Karen McNeil. It's probably at least double that here in 2025, just because raising prices in general, everything's gotten more expensive. White and red wines are famously known for their aging potential in Bordeaux. So many people will collect bottles, lay them down for several years. There are people who specialize in crediting and reviewing people's wine inventory, and then there's this I don't know if it's necessarily secret, but there's this community of people who sell and trade specialty aged Bordeaux wine bottles. Someone certifies it to make sure it's legitimate, that it's not an imposter bottle, and then Like, and then how do you credit it? Like, how much wine or how much money do you assign to the value of this bottle? And then it's just a really crazy, bizarre world that I didn't even know existed in the wine community, but it does. So it's pretty crazy. Top varieties for Bordeaux, of course, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. Those are considered the top 5 reds from Bordeaux, right? Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot actually make up 80% of the vineyard land in Bordeaux. So those are the primary focus of that region, right? And we also have an article about why wine bottles come in different shapes, right? That is basically pertaining to the region that it originates from. So a Bordeaux bottle will have these straight sides, very slender and parallel here. The Burgundy bottles will have this kind of tulip shape, this wider bottom, and then this slimming neck at the top. And that just has to do with the region it comes from. Okay, Cabernet Sauvignon. You probably had it. You probably enjoy it. It's one of the most famous grapes in the world. This is actually a product of crossing Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc grape varieties. So that's where they got the name Cabernet Sauvignon. So Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Franc, hence Cab Sauv. Interestingly enough, Cabernet Sauvignon can have a characteristic bell pepper component to it. It depends the region it comes from. It can be more or less expressed in the wine. The grapes have a natural high acidity and tannins, which lend to the wine having a long aging potential, and that is because they are small berries. The cluster has very nice airflow. It's very easy to grow this variety, and it produces very nice wine, of course. And with the smaller berries, you get a higher juice to skin ratio during your fermentation. So you're going to extract more tannins, more structure, hence a wine that can age much longer. Interestingly enough, it's been criticized in other parts of the world as being a colonizer, as a grape that is so popular, it takes over the plantings of different regions and kind of pushes out any indigenous grapes that are native to that region, right? So Italy is a big one on this, right? They don't want Cabernet Sauvignon planted over there because they have so many native varieties that would just otherwise go extinct, right? Perfect. Next we have Merlot. The name for Merlot has been thought to come from merle, which is the French name for a black bird. The grapes are deep bluish black in color, almost kind of like a raven's feather, or I guess just a blackbird feather. So that is kind of a fun comparison, right? There's 2 distinct styles of Merlot. So there's the international style, which you'll see a lot in California, right? So harvesting later and riper to gain inky purple wines with full body, high alcohol, and lush velvety tannins. The Bordeaux style, however, is harvesting earlier to maintain acidity and producing a more medium-bodied wine with moderate alcohol levels and fresh red fruit flavors. So very interesting. See if you can do a side-by-side and see if it's legit, right? But overall, Merlot is known to have, cherry and plum components, chocolate, bay leaf, and also vanilla. So despite what Sideways says, Merlot is a fantastic wine, and it is severely underappreciated these days. Okay, next we'll dive into the Rhone Valley, which has 2 distinctive parts, northern and southern Rhone. They're very famous for their GSM blends, so Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. It's very common to see white wines blended with red wines here, so mostly adding Viognier, Marsanne, and Roussanne to a Syrah base, which is very fun. And ultimately, their top varieties are, so for their white grapes, we have Marsanne, Roussanne, Viognier, Grenache Blanc, Vermentino, Muscat Blanc, Claret. For reds, Grenache, mostly in the south, Syrah, mostly in the north, Mourvedre, and also Cinsault, which is very fun. Okay, so taking a dive on Viognier, the origin of this grape is actually unknown, genetically speaking. There is some research that points to Croatia, what is presently known as Croatia, as the variety, so a lot like Zinfandel, right? It's also not uncommon to see this variety co-fermented or blended into Syrah in this region, right? and it's commonly found in two styles. So you have stainless steel, which is more fruity, medium-bodied, and contains stone fruit flavors. Or it could be oaked, which is heavier bodied, sometimes creamy and buttery, and sometimes in an extreme situation it can develop an oily character as well. So not always favorable in that situation, but I've seen some nice oaked Viogniers in my time, right? So some fun primary flavors that are associated with Viognier are tangerine, peach, mango, honeysuckle, and rose, right? The one I see most commonly outlined is peach in Viognier. Lots of peach characters, for sure. Okay, on to the GSM blend. I love a good GSM blend. I think it's one of the first red wines that I started to really appreciate and love when I was a new wine drinker. So GSM is just the acronym, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, right? All these three wines just create such a fun and interesting blend of flavors, and they just go so well together. This is why they become such a popular blend, right? So Grenache brings to the table soft berry and slight spice, contributes alcohol, warmth, and fruitiness without adding tannin. Syrah is a full-bodied black fruit and pepper-forward wine. It helps add color, backbone, and tannins. This provides like a baseline or a balance to the blend. And then we have Mourvedre, which contributes acidity, structure, and flavors of sweet plum and hints of tobacco. So overall, for Rhone, we get raspberry, blackberry, rosemary, baking spices, and lavender, which makes for a fantastic wine just on its own with food. It's very easy drinking. It's very expressive. It's fantastic. If you ever get a chance locally to go to Lavender Ridge and try their Côtes du Calaveras GSM blend, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. I wish more people made GSMs here. They're really great wines. Next, we have Provence. We're here in the southeastern corner of France. It is a food capital indeed, and some actually say the food overshadows the wine, which is a very bold statement. It has influence of Bordeaux, Rhone, Italian, and Provence, like provincial wine varieties in the region. It's mostly known for their refreshing rosés, but they also create a lot of blends from mixed culture varieties. What is really special about this region is it's known to have this character called Garrigue, and we'll talk about that on the next slide, right? So top varieties that you would see in this region include Mourvedre, Grenache Blanc, Grenache, Cabernet Sauvignon, and then even like Vermentino, which is Italian in origin, right? So very interesting. And Provence rosés have this just very beautiful light pink color to them. They're very nice rosés. So as far as the component that's found in all these wines, Garrigue, we actually have something very similar to this in the Sierra foothills that we're calling Sierra Spice. But we'll learn about Garrigue first. So Garrigue is a distinctly herbaceous, peppery, or smoky tone, reminiscent of low-lying vegetation that grows wild in sun-scorched limestone soils along the Mediterranean, particularly the south of France. So this is not necessarily one particular plant, but rather a combination of all the spices that grow in the region. This includes lavender, thyme, basil, sage, bay leaves, juniper, and mint, and much, much more. So you can actually just open up a spice jar of herbs de Provence, and it's a combination of those things, and you can smell it. You can compare it to a rosé from Provence and see if you can detect the notes, right? So this is like a real life terroir situation, right? The plants that grow in this area contribute to the characteristics of the wine that's produced in this region. So when I think of Garrigue, I think about, I like to go bike riding in Tahoe. There's a lot of sage that grows in Tahoe, and sometimes it gets really hot in the summers. And so that kind of reminds me of that note growing up, which is very sentimental. But it's very nice. And on the relation to the Sierra foothills with Sierra Spice, we have all these, beautiful evergreen trees that grow around our vineyards, and we have all these Christmas tree farms around us. We have this underlying component that we're seeing in a lot of our red wines especially, but in some of our whites, is this component of this. It's like a pine note. It's a fresh tree, forest, pine, mountainous, high elevation, outdoorsy component that we can't find in wines from other regions. So next time you're in the region, you're trying some of our wines, see if you can detect that or not. Okay, moving on. Top variety that we'll talk about from Provence. We'll talk about Mourvedre, also a Monastrell, right? This is likely Spanish in origin, genetically speaking, but it has not been confirmed yet. So it tends to produce tannic and acidic wines with deep colors. The wines are also intensely fruity without being jammy or herbaceous. It can be difficult to grow, as a lot of grape growers say it prefers its face in the sun and its feet in the water, which sounds fantastic, but those are not typically the conditions of a stereotypical vineyard, unfortunately. It needs warm weather, plenty of irrigation, and plenty of leaf pulling to clear up the grape canopy. If it is produced well, it'll have characters of blackberry, black pepper, cocoa, tobacco, and even roasted meat. So, very fun variety. Okay, on to French wine laws and systems. So if you heard me calling out like AOCs in different parts of these regions, we're going to talk about this more now. So the concept of appellation contrôlée in the 1920s, this was to counter fraud and adulteration. The areas of production, permitted grape varieties, grape growing, and winemaking are become actually defined. And it's also used to guarantee place of origin and style of those wines. So, regional classifications for France. If the wine is labeled as a PDO, this is a protected designation of origin, right? So, in France, it should be Appellation d'origine contrôlée. I don't speak French, sorry. Which is also AOC or AC. There are 450 AOCs in France. Next, we have PGI wines, which is a protected geographical indication. So this would include if it's labeled as Vin de Pays, VDP, or Indication Geographic Protégé, IGP, which are 74 distinct regions. And then others is Vin de France, or a wine of France, which is allowed to list varietals on the label, right? We have a nice article from Wine Folly that goes into a little more detail, right? So here we have it kind of mapped out as these overlapping circles, right? So as we get closer to the center, it becomes more specialized. The more wider it is, the more broad the classification is, right? So it's a nice graphic. Also from Wine Folly, thank you. So the most broad term of a classification from France is a Vin de France, so a wine from France. It only lists the origin as the country, France, but it's allowed to list grape varieties on the label. Then as we get higher up the tier, we have the IGP, 74 distinct regions, including wines labeled, these specific components. Then we have AOC. There are 363 appellations for wine and spirits, including regional wines like Bourgogne, Bordeaux, and Champagne, right? Very cool. So those are that's the classification system. And then every region and sub-region, like we talked about with Burgundy, is going to have its own little specific classification, right? Wine label examples. So wine labels from Europe have classically been known as difficult to interpret. So we'll break this down into a way that hopefully makes sense. So generally speaking, there can be a winery name, right? So here's Domaine de Dionysus, right? And then we have a vintage, 2010. So winery name, who produced this, 2010, the vintage, when the grapes were harvested. And then you can see the largest amount of focus is spent on the village it comes from. So Queyran is the village it came from. And then there's an appellation focus, so Côtes du Rhône villages. So this is a village within the Côtes du Rhône region, right? Then we have the grape varieties listed. So Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and then Vieux Carignan. Then we also have the domain bottled. So bottle domain, producer name, and location, right? And and then we also have alcohol percentage, and then the volume of the bottle, right? So this can vary, right? Sometimes it can just be the village and the appellation. The grape varieties are not always explicitly labeled on French wine bottles. It's just a reflection of the region, so you just have to know based off of it, right? Like Chablis is Sauvignon Blanc, right? But you don't know that unless you know about Chablis. So that's kind of an example. Each region is very specific, so you just have to do a little more deep dive into each of those. Next, we have our review questions. I have 2 pages of this. This will help prepare you guys for the quiz that you will have. Other than that, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.